All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we do it around here. Somebody sends us something cool, and then we unpack it. And, well, today's topic is...
It's a little different.
It is a little different.
Yeah.
So we're talking about exploding bread.
Exploding bread.
So somebody sent this in. We have some source material about it. And
there's some wild stories.
it's wild. And I
Yeah.
gotta admit, I'm very curious about this myself.
Right.
Because, we've all baked bread and you think about, the yeast and all that stuff. But
Yeah. And
exploding bread, I mean, is that even...
Well, it can happen.
It can happen.
It can definitely happen.
So we're going to find out why.
Yeah.
Okay, so the basic idea here, right, is that the same process that makes bread rise can also make it explode.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, so how does that...
Well, so, yeast is a living organism, and it eats sugar, and it produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct, and that's what creates those little air pockets in the bread and gives it its texture.
So those tiny little things are basically little gas factories.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, so when you're baking bread, you're essentially creating a controlled environment for this gas production to happen.
Okay.
But sometimes things can get a little out of control.
Out of control. How so?
So imagine this. You've got a very active yeast culture. Maybe it's a warm day, and the yeast is really going to town, producing a lot of gas.
Okay.
And now imagine that this is happening in a sealed container.
Okay.
So that gas has nowhere to go. The pressure builds up.
Oh, damn.
And boom, you've got a doughy detonation.
Doughy detonation. I love it.
It's a real thing.
So we're not just talking like little air bubbles popping. We're talking like...
Oh, no, it can range from like a contained pop to a full-on eruption.
A full-on eruption. Okay, so it depends.
It really depends on the circumstance.
Okay, so what are the circumstances that can cause this? What are the factors?
Okay, so there's a few things that can make exploding bread more likely. First, the type of yeast you're using, sourdough starter, for example, is notorious for this because it uses wild yeast strains that are much more active than commercial yeast.
Interesting. Okay, so sourdough.
Sourdough, yeah, it's got a mind of its own.
So that's what happened to the person in the middle of the night, right?
Probably, yeah. I mean, sourdough, it likes to escape.
Wow, okay, so sourdough's a big one. What else?
Temperatures, another big one. A warm environment speeds up yeast activity. So if it's a hot day or your kitchen's really warm, your dough might rise a lot faster than you expect.
And that can lead to...
Boom.
Kaboom.
Exactly.
Okay, temperature. Got it. What else?
The amount of sugar in the dough, more sugar, equals more food for the yeast, which means more gas.
Oh, so it's like a feast for them.
It's a feast.
And then they get really rowdy.
And they party.
Okay, sugar temperature type of yeast?
And then the type of container the dough is in, if it's a sealed container, like an airtight container, or even a really dense dough that doesn't allow for gas to escape, that can also lead to problems.
Okay, so it's not just about the container itself, but also like the density of the dough.
Right, exactly.
Got it. Okay, so we've got like 4 things here. Sourdough, temperature, sugar, and container.
Right.
So basically we're talking about a yeast-powered bread bomb here.
Pretty much.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? It's all about finding that delicate balance.
Yeah.
You want enough gas to give your bread a nice rise, but not so much that it explodes, like a science experiment.
That's really cool. Okay, so what did we learn here today?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that even something as simple as baking bread involves these powerful forces of nature.
Yeah.
You're working with these tiny little organisms that are producing all this energy, and it's up to you to create the right environment for them to do their thing.
It's like we're playing God with yeast.
Kind of.
That's amazing. So for our listeners out there, next time you're baking bread, think about all the science that's going on in that dough.
Yeah, pay attention to those factors. We talked about the type of yeast, the temperature, the sugar, the container.
Right. And maybe you've even experienced some of this yourself. Maybe you've had a loaf that rose way more than you expected. Or maybe you even had a little prop in your oven.
Hopefully not a full-on explosion, though.
Why not?
Yeah.
But, it happens. It's all part of the fun of baking, right?
Exactly.
Keep experimenting, stay curious, and as always, happy baking.
Happy